I always thought that when I finally retired, I'd be able to breathe. 40 years I gave to the steel mill, 40 years of sweat and ash under my fingernails, the sound of machines grinding in my ears, the ache in my bones that never really left. All through those years, I told myself it would be worth it. That one day, when my body couldn't carry the load anymore, I'd have peace. I'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, tend to my garden, maybe take the truck down to the lake, and spend an afternoon with the fishing rod Evelyn gave me for my 50th birthday. I thought retirement was supposed to be a reward, a gentle landing after the climb. But life doesn't give you what you expect. Evelyn passed 5 years ago. Cancer, quick and cruel, like a thief in the night. One moment she was fussing at me for leaving my boots by the door, and the next she was gone. The silence in the house since then has been a wound I couldn't patch. My daughter, Clara, did her best to fill the gaps. She came by every Sunday, bringing groceries I didn't ask for, chattering about her students and the little joys of her life. But she had her own world to tend to, and I didn't want to be the kind of man who leaned too heavily on her. That left David, my boy, my son. From the day he was born, I promised myself I'd give him everything I never had. Clara was strong enough to carry herself, but David always had big dreams, always wanted to reach higher than the rest of us. When he was a boy, he'd sit on the porch steps with a stick, pretending it was a microphone, and tell me how one day he'd be rich. One day, he'd live in a house so big we'd get lost in it. I used to laugh, ruffle his hair, and tell him I'd be proud no matter where he ended up. When he came to me in his 20s with the idea of starting his own construction company, I didn't hesitate. I emptied half my retirement savings to fund it. When the banks wouldn't give him a loan, I put my name down as guarantor. When payroll ran short, I pawned Evelyn's wedding ring to cover the gap. Every sacrifice I made, I told myself it was worth it. That one day, when he was standing tall and proud, I could point to him and say, "That's my boy." I helped him build that. And for a while, it seemed like I was right. His business grew. Trucks with his company logo started popping up around town. He hired crews, won contracts, and spoke about expanding like it was just around the corner. I'd sit in my chair at night and smile, picturing Evelyn beside me, whispering that she always knew David would do well. But success changes people. Or maybe it just peels away the mask and shows who they always were. I noticed the first cracks when he stopped calling me Dad and started calling me Old Man. He said it jokingly, with a smirk, but there was a bite underneath. Then came the dinners where he talked more about Marissa than about the business, where he waved away my questions about his finances as if I were a child who couldn't understand. I told myself it was nothing, that he was busy, that the stress of the company weighed on him. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, because that's what fathers do. The night everything broke, he invited me to dinner at his house. I should have felt proud walking through those doors. It was everything he used to dream about as a boy. Polished wood floors, granite countertops, walls hung with art I didn't recognize, a wine rack stocked with bottles I couldn't pronounce. But instead of pride, I felt small, like I had stepped into a world where I didn't belong. Marissa was the first to greet me. She was beautiful. I'll give her that. Sharp green eyes, hair so perfectly styled it looked like she'd walked out of a magazine. She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind of smile you give a stranger on the street. All evening, she spoke to me like I was some relic of the past, some stubborn old man clinging to stories no one cared to hear. When I tried to talk about Evelyn, about the mill, about the years I had worked to get David to this point, Marissa changed the subject. She asked about wine, about travel, about stocks. Things she knew I had no knowledge of. The meal was good, I'll admit that. Roast beef, potatoes seasoned in a way that reminded me faintly of Evelyn's cooking, though without the warmth behind it. But I couldn't shake the unease in my gut. It was the way David avoided my eyes, the way he laughed a little too quickly at Marissa's jokes, the way he kept checking his phone even when I was speaking. Something was coming, I could feel it. It came after dessert. We were sitting in the living room, me on a leather couch that felt too new, too polished. While Marissa lit one of those expensive candles that filled the air with a vanilla sweetness I found cloying. David cleared his throat, and that's when he said it. "Dad, I don't think it's best for you to come around too much anymore." At first, I thought I misheard him. I laughed, waiting for the punchline. But he didn't smile. He just shifted in his chair, eyes darting toward Marissa before settling back on me. "Marissa's family is particular," he went on. They think you don't fit. It's embarrassing sometimes, the way you talk about the mill or about Mom's old recipes or about your truck. It's better if you keep some distance." Each word landed like a hammer blow. My throat went dry. My own son, the boy I raised, the boy I bled for, was ashamed of me. Ashamed of the life I had built with my own hands, of the sacrifices that put the roof over his head, of the sweat that sent him to college, of the love that gave him everything that I wanted to scream. I wanted to remind him of every loan I signed, every hour I worked overtime, every piece of myself I gave up so he could chase his dreams. But I didn't. My pride wouldn't let me. Instead, I smiled. A small, tight smile. I stood up, thanked Marissa for the meal, and told David I understood. Then I left. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. Anger burned in my chest, hot and bitter, but underneath it was something colder, something sharper that I had given him everything. And in return, he had cast me aside like trash. But he didn't realize something. All those years of helping him build his empire, all those documents I'd signed, all those sacrifices I had made, they weren't just charity. They were leverage. They were power, and now he had given me every reason to use them. The silence in my house that night was heavier than usual. I sat in Evelyn's old chair, the one with the faded fabric she used to complain about but never replaced, and stared at the photographs on the mantel. David as a boy, grinning with missing teeth. Clara with her diploma in hand. Evelyn in the garden, sun hat tilted over her smile. Memories of a life I had built, a life that now felt stolen from me. David's words replayed in my mind like a cruel record stuck on repeat. "It's embarrassing sometimes, better if you keep some distance." He had said it so casually, like he was asking me to pass the salt at dinner, as if tossing me aside were nothing. I thought about picking up the phone, calling Clara, pouring out the betrayal I felt. But what good would that do? Clara loved her brother, despite his arrogance. She would tell me to be patient, to let it go. That family was family, and we had to forgive. But forgiveness had its limits. Evelyn used to say I had the patience of a stone, but even stones crack after years of being struck. Instead of calling, I pulled open the drawer of my old oak desk. Inside were folders, records, contracts, receipts I had kept over the years. Evelyn had always teased me for being too meticulous, for saving every scrap of paper. "You're not running the CIA, John," she'd laugh. "You're just paying the water bill." But I had my habits, and that night, for the first time, I was grateful for them. I spread the papers across the desk. There was the loan I co-signed for David's company, the mortgage I had helped him secure, my name listed neatly beneath his, the business registration documents, the insurance policies, the letters from a bank. All those years, David had leaned on me to make his dream a reality. And I had said yes every time, never asking for repayment, never doubting that he would honor me in return. Now, those papers looked different. They weren't just memories of my sacrifice. They were keys. Keys to the very house he had sat in, dismissing me like a nuisance. I picked up the mortgage agreement, reading through the fine print. His company, too, was leveraged against it. Missed payments would mean foreclosure, repossession, the kind of financial collapse that would shake him to his core. I knew my son well enough to understand. His pride was tied to that house, to the image he projected. To lose it would cut him deeper than any words could. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Revenge, I realized, didn't have to be loud. It didn't have to be messy. It could be silent, calculated, surgical. It could be as simple as a phone call. The next morning, I drove into town. The bank manager, an old acquaintance from my mill days, still recognized me. We shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and I slid the documents across his desk. I didn't have to say much. Just a few questions about options, about rights, about what could be done if one party to an agreement decided to withdraw support. He explained it all patiently, unaware of the storm brewing behind my polite nods. By the time I left, I knew exactly what strings I could pull. I wasn't rushing. No, this had to be done carefully. Revenge was a dish best served not just cold, but precise. I went home and called the mortgage office. My voice was calm, steady, betraying none of the satisfaction curling inside me as I spoke. I confirmed the cancellation, effective immediately. They assured me the paperwork will be processed by the new year. By the time the clock struck midnight on New Year's Eve, David's mortgage was no longer secure. I pictured him opening the letter, the confusion spreading across his face, the panic setting in as he realized the foundation he thought was so solid had cracks running through it. I pictured Marissa's sharp voice, accusing, demanding explanations. The arguments, the late-night phone calls, the sleepless hours as he scrambled to fix what he thought could never be broken. And I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. But that was only the beginning. One act of revenge, no matter how satisfying, wasn't enough. David had to learn. He had to understand what it meant to cast aside the man who built the very ground he walked on. And Marissa, she needed to see what happened when you mocked the hands that had once fed you. I started small. Quiet moves, little pushes. I contacted a supplier I knew from David's early days, a man who still owed me a favor. I hinted at financial instability, planted seeds of doubt. Within a week, that supplier tightened terms with David's company, demanding upfront payments where once he'd allowed credit. Nothing that would ruin him outright, but enough to strain his cash flow. Next, I reached out to an old buddy from a union who had connections with the local inspectors. A casual conversation, a suggestion that maybe David's sites weren't quite up to code. Soon enough, inspections started cropping up more frequently, delays that cost time and money. All the while, I kept silent. I answered David's rare calls with the same steady voice, offering no hint of the storm I was quietly guiding. Clara noticed I seemed lighter, but when she asked why, I just told her I'd been sleeping better. Weeks passed. I imagined the tension building in David's household. Marissa would be demanding answers, her lifestyle threatened. David would be scrambling, pride wounded, unable to ask for help because he had already made it clear he wanted no part of me. I wasn't just taking his money. I was taking his peace, his pride, his illusion of control. And it was only a matter of time before he came face to face with the truth. The old man he dismissed was the very one pulling his strings. Still, I knew patience was key. I couldn't move too quickly, or he'd suspect. I had to let the pressure build, let him believe it was the world conspiring against him, until the moment was right to reveal just how wrong he had been. At night, I'd sit in Evelyn's chair, the papers neatly stacked back in their drawer, and whisper to her photograph. "Don't worry, love. He'll learn. He'll finally understand what respect means." And each time I said it, I felt her smile, faint but certain, as if she too believed justice was finally being served. By February, the first cracks in David's perfect life had begun to show. I didn't need to hear it from him directly. I could see it in the small things. The flashy car that used to sit polished in his driveway stayed parked longer, gathering a film of dust. The lights in his house, once glowing late into the night with parties and friends, now dimmed earlier, as if joy itself had been rationed. Even the landscaping, something Marissa once obsessed over, looked less manicured, a hedge left uneven here, a patch of lawn browning there. To anyone else, it might have seemed insignificant, but I knew better. Little lapses meant something deeper was unraveling. It wasn't long before Clara called me, her voice tinged with confusion. "Dad, have you talked to David lately? He seems stressed." I chuckled softly, keeping my tone light. "Businesses have ups and downs, honey. I'm sure he'll figure it out." But I knew David wouldn't figure it out. Not with the way I'd stacked the cards against him. The mortgage cancellation had been the first strike, and now the bank was breathing down his neck, reminding him of the precarious line he was walking. The suppliers tightening their credit terms made things worse, forcing him to juggle cash he didn't have. Then came the inspections, each one finding some new issue that delayed projects and ate into his already strained finances. And I wasn't done. Revenge, I'd learned, wasn't just about striking hard. It was about striking in layers. Each blow should seem like coincidence until the victim is drowning in them. My next step was subtle. I reached out to an old contact at the local paper. We had shared a few beers back in the day when I was on the Mills Union Committee, and though time had dulled our friendship, favors have a way of lasting. I dropped a quiet word about David's business. Rumors of instability, whispered doubts about his ability to deliver on contracts. I never named myself, never spoke too directly, just enough to spark interest. A week later, an article appeared. Small, tucked away in the business section, but potent. Local contractor faces questions over reliability. It didn't accuse him of anything outright, but it planted seeds of doubt in the minds of potential clients. And doubt spreads faster than wildfire. The effect was immediate. Clara mentioned over coffee that David had been unusually irritable, snapping at small things. "He's not himself, Dad," she said softly. "Marissa looked upset at church last Sunday. They slipped out early." I nodded, hiding the satisfaction curling inside me, because I already knew what had happened. Marissa, whose entire sense of worth was built on appearances, had probably read that article, felt the sting of whispered gossip from her social circle. She would have turned on David, demanding explanations, demanding he fix it. And David, too proud to admit weakness, too stubborn to seek help, would have lashed back. Marriages don't collapse in a single moment. They fracture slowly under the weight of unmet expectations and mounting pressure. I had simply quickened the pace. Still, I wasn't reckless. Each move I made, I let time pass between them. I wanted David to think his world was crumbling naturally, that fate itself had turned against him. By March, his business was bleeding. He called me once, just once. I remember the sound of his voice on the line, taut, tired, but still trying to mask the desperation. "Dad, have you heard anything? Any rumors about the company?" I leaned back in my chair, letting silence stretch before I answered. "Rumors? No, son. Just the usual talk." "Why?" He hesitated, and for a moment, I thought he might crack, might confess how bad things were. But pride held him back. "Nothing. Just thought I'd ask." When the call ended, I sat in the quiet and felt something sharp twist in my chest. A part of me, the father in me, ached to reach through the phone, to tell him the truth, to lift the weight I had so carefully placed on his shoulders. But that part of me was drowned out by another voice, Evelyn's voice, echoing from years past. "Respect isn't given, John. It's earned." And David had not earned it. So I pressed forward. I turned my attention to Marissa next. She had been the one to smirk that day, the one to dismiss me as a relic, an embarrassment. If David was going to suffer, she was going to feel it too. Through a neighbor of hers, an old friend of Evelyn's, in fact. I let slip that David's financial troubles might be worse than anyone knew. It didn't take much. Marissa's circle of friends was a hive of gossip, and within days, she was the subject of whispers at the salon, at church, at every boutique she frequented. I heard about it indirectly, of course. Clara told me Marissa had skipped a luncheon she never would have missed. A small thing, but telling. The queen bee doesn't hide unless the hive is turned against her. By April, the pressure had boiled over. I was walking back from the grocery store when I saw David's car parked outside my house. He was sitting inside, engine running, staring at the steering wheel. For nearly 15 minutes, he didn't move. Just sat there, as if debating with himself. Then, just as suddenly, he drove off without knocking. I stood at the window, watching the taillights disappear, and I knew what it meant. He was close to breaking, but I didn't want him to just break. I wanted him to understand, to feel the weight of every insult, every dismissal, every ounce of arrogance he had flung at me. I wanted him to know the old man he had pushed aside was the one holding the strings all along. So I set the final stage. I made one more call to the bank. Quiet, deliberate. I confirmed the foreclosure proceedings would move ahead, that the house, the very house where he had told me I wasn't welcome, would soon no longer be his. When the letter arrived on his doorstep, I wasn't there to see his face. But I didn't need to be. I could imagine it perfectly. The disbelief, the anger, the scramble to fix what couldn't be fixed. That night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat in Evelyn's chair. I raised the glass to her photograph. "Almost there, love," I whispered. "Almost there." And as the whiskey burned its way down, I felt the slow, steady satisfaction of a man who knew that justice was finally catching up. The foreclosure notice was only the beginning of the end. By May, David's once proud house, the one where I wasn't welcome, had a silent tension clinging to it like fog. Curtains stayed drawn longer in the morning, fewer cars came and went from the driveway, and neighbors began whispering about late-night arguments. Clara, ever concerned, mentioned in passing that she'd seen Marissa crying in the grocery store parking lot. Her perfect mascara streaked down her face. "It's not like her," Clara said, her voice carrying that mix of pity and curiosity people can't quite hide. I nodded quietly, hiding the truth from my daughter. If she knew I'd been the architect of her brother's misery, she'd never forgive me. But this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about respect. David had built his identity on control, on power, on the illusion that he was untouchable. And now, one by one, those illusions were dissolving in his hands. The contractors no longer returned his calls. His credit was shredded, and clients, once lining up for his services, were canceling contracts faster than he could plead for extensions. But the cruelest blow wasn't financial. It was personal. Marissa, who had married him for status and comfort, now found herself trapped in a sinking ship. The woman who had smirked in my presence, dismissing me like a piece of outdated furniture, now carried bitterness in every word. I heard it through Clara, through whispers in the town. "She's blaming David for everything," Clara said one afternoon. "You should have seen them at dinner, Dad. They barely spoke a word to each other." Michael said he heard yelling through the walls. I hid my satisfaction behind a sip of coffee. I didn't need to witness their collapse firsthand. The reports were enough. By June, the sheriff's notice was nailed to their front door. Neighbors walking their dogs slowed to read it, some shaking their heads, others smirking in schadenfreude. The mighty contractor, the man who'd strutted through town with a flashy watch and louder laugh, was about to lose the very home that symbolized his pride. I drove past that day, slow enough to catch the sight of David standing on the porch, the notice crumpled in his fist. His jaw was tight, his face pale. Marissa was behind him, arms crossed, venom in her eyes. They didn't see me. I didn't need them to. The revenge was almost complete, but there was one last piece. I didn't just want David to lose everything. I wanted him to know why. Not the mechanics of my revenge, not the calls and strings I had pulled. No, I wanted him to understand in his bones that this was the cost of arrogance, of turning his back on the man who had raised him. So I invited him to meet me. Just us. No Clara, no Marissa, no buffer. We met at the small diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where Evelyn and I had shared Sunday breakfast decades ago. David walked in looking like a ghost of himself. His once-tailored suit was wrinkled, the circles under his eyes stark against his pale skin. For the first time in years, he looked less like a proud man and more like a lost boy. He slid into the booth across from me without a word. For a while, we just sat there. The clink of cutlery and the hum of conversation filled the silence. Finally, I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "You know, David, your mother used to say pride is like quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink." His eyes flickered, a mix of anger and weariness. "Why are you telling me this?" I studied him, the son who had once been my pride before he became my burden. Because I warned you years ago. Respect isn't given, it's earned. But you thought you were above that. You thought you could shut me out, humiliate me in front of Marissa, dismiss everything I've worked for. And now, I gestured vaguely. Look where that's gotten you. His jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might argue, might throw the blame back at me, as he always had. But instead, his shoulders sagged. He stared down at the table, defeated. You don't understand, he whispered. It's all gone. The business, the house, even Marissa. She's talking about leaving. I let the words hang in the air. The punishment had reached its peak. I could have twisted the knife, told him outright that I had orchestrated every fall, every stumble. But that wasn't necessary. His imagination would torture him more than any confession from me ever could. Instead, I leaned back, folded my hands, and said quietly, maybe now you'll understand what it feels like to lose everything that mattered. Maybe now you'll learn. He didn't look up. He didn't argue. He just sat there, hollow, like a man staring at the ruins of his own empire. We left the diner in silence. I watched him walk to his car, shoulders slumped, and drive off without so much as a glance back. And that was it. The final strike had landed. By July, the house was gone, foreclosed, auctioned off to a stranger who had no idea of the drama its walls had witnessed. David moved into a small rental across town, stripped of the status symbols he once clung to. Marissa, true to form, didn't last long after the fall. She filed for divorce within weeks, citing irreconcilable differences. I heard about it all from Clara, who tried to comfort her brother, but received only bitterness in return. David had become a shell, angry and resentful, but with no one left to blame but himself. As for me, I carried on with my life, quietly, steadily. My evenings were spent in Evelyn's chair, sipping whiskey, the soft hum of the old clock filling the silence. Sometimes I would think of David, of the boy he had been, of the man he had chosen to become. And though the part of me mourned the loss of what could have been, a deeper part of me felt the steady satisfaction of justice fulfilled. Revenge hadn't been loud or violent. It hadn't required shouting or fists. It had been quiet, deliberate, like the steady turning of gears in a machine too complex for the victim to see until it was too late. And as I sat there, raising my glass to Evelyn's photograph, I whispered, "It's done, love. Justice is done." The world outside moved on. Seasons changed, neighbors forgot, and life continued. But in the quiet of my home, I carried the memory of what I'd done, not as a burden, but as a reminder that even the forgotten, the dismissed, the underestimated can rise. And when they do, the fall is always harder for those who never saw it coming. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments.